This month we begin a series of Sundays celebrating the spiritual journeys of some of our members. It is a tradition here at UUCCI that always brings us closer together as we share the paths that brought us to this congregation. I first met Diane Spofford at a women's group meeting at her lovely home on Pearl Street. She was friendly and gracious and made me feel instantly connected through conversation about our common teaching profession. I was so impressed with the artwork hanging on her walls, and even more so when I discovered that she had done them herself. Her commitment at UUCCI is long-standing, going all the way back to the early days when the group met in each other's homes, performing Sunday services without a minister. And her dedication has endured through many years of church history, with Diane serving in so many capacities, but always finding a way to make UUCCI the center of her life. I especially appreciated her suggestion that we plan a women's retreat in the spring of, I think, 2010, where we all bonded over healthy food and intense inner examination and lots of outdoor exercise. Diane led us in a chocolate meditation that was both calming and delicious. I love her candor and her passion when expressing her ideas, her humor deftly applied to make a point, and her willingness to say yes when called upon to lead, to participate, to help, and to share her skills. Such a pleasure it was to work with her on the worship associate team, learning how to prepare services, planning for the UUCCI fair, ironing out wrinkles in planning for guest speakers. We met many times at Graham's Bakery, our favorite spot for UUCCI discussions. What a treasure it has been for Diane to illuminate her Jewish faith. She prepared a Seder ceremony for us, explaining the symbolism of the food and the rituals surrounding it. The reverence that she still holds for her religious roots always informs her participation at UUCCI, bringing her thirst for learning, a call to social justice, and acceptance of others at every step of the way. We are so glad to anticipate this morning's service. So let us now begin with the lighting of our chalice. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together.
If you see what needs to be repaired and how to repair it, then you have found a piece of the world that God has left for you to complete. But if you only see what is wrong and what is ugly in the world, then it is you yourself you need to repair.
A person will worship something, have no doubt about that. We may think our tribute is paid in the dark recesses of our hearts, but it will out. That which dominates our imagination and our thoughts will determine our lives and character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship. For what we are worshiping, we are becoming.
I grew up in a household with a grandfather, 2 aunts, my father, my mother, and 2 sisters. It was a house full of love, and the fact that there were so many people there to support one another meant that any time that my parents were busy, tired, worried, or just plain doing something else, there was always someone we could go to. And I think that makes a big difference in a child's life. I grew up on 40th and New Jersey Street in Indianapolis in what was considered a conservative Judaism household. It later became what is called conservative Reconstructionist Judaism, because the philosophy became more of a, how do we repair the world? And this was the concentration that I soon picked up on. There was on our house, a doorpost, and at the doorpost was nailed a tefillin. This is a tefillin. And what it did was it contains the 10 Commandments. And I was taught, along with my sisters, that when you entered the house, you first stopped at the doorpost, you kissed your hand, and then you touched the tefillin, that it was holy, and that it was always there in your spirit. My grandfather was Orthodox to start with, and so I would say that our household was more, tended more to those practices for quite a long time. We kept a kosher kitchen, which meant that we did not eat meat with milk at the same meal. There are dietary laws in Judaism. You do not eat the meat of the lamb with the milk of the mother. Animals are slaughtered in a very specific way, and a prayer is said over them. One does not eat pork or any other animal with a cloven hoof. And I would accompany my mother, or my Aunt Nancy, who lived with us, to the kosher butcher shop, where while I was waiting for the order to be filled, I would get to have a kosher hot dog as a treat. And unfortunately, with current knowledge about health and diet, I am sad to report that hot dogs are no longer considered treats. My mother swore she never ate pork, and she would make a terrible face if it was mentioned. However, when visiting my dad's family in Chicago, we would go to a restaurant called Sally's, where we would have barbecue. It was a highlight of going to Chicago. My sister Andrea swears that what we ate was pork, and that my dad lied to my mother about the nature of the meat. We kept 2 separate sets of plates, bowls, cutlery, and glasses. Each group had its own cupboard or drawer. They were never used together, and they were never washed together. And my mother once told me a story about her mother needing to use a pot, and because it was at that point considered tray for not how it needed to be, it might have been used for meat and now need to be used for milk meal, she buried it in the backyard overnight. I regularly attended Sunday school on Sunday mornings, as that was not the Sabbath for us. In Judaism, Friday night on sundown to Saturday night on sundown is the Jewish Sabbath. Friday night and Saturday morning services are at the synagogue or temple, and we called our synagogue both names. When I would go to services, my favorite part was when the Torah, which contained the 10 Commandments and the 5 books of the Bible, would be taken out of the ark, and it would be walked around so that people could come forward out of their seats and touch it or kiss it. And I loved doing that. One of my favorite memories is of my mother every Friday night turning off the kitchen light, putting a covering over her head, lighting the candles as she softly sang the Baruch Atah Adonai prayer. In the dark, my mom was bathed in a soft glow. There was a blue and tin white container in the kitchen called the tzedakah box. It collected the change from our pockets and our purses and our wallets. It was a box for charity. Every year we contributed money to pay for trees planted in Israel to make that land fertile again. And for the longest time as a child, I carried a vision of a row of trees with my name labeled on a sign nearby. I believed that God was male, ancient, and saw every little thing I did. And I don't know where the picture that came from of a male. I don't know, because there are no pictures of God in Judaism. God is represented sometimes as some sort of light, if there's anything. I believed that God was in the small space behind my ear, that close to me. Old Testament stories where God was demanding an exact punishing the guilty shaped a strong belief in God's close knowledge of our hidden desires or thoughts. This belief nearly destroyed me as a teenager when my father died unexpectedly. The 10 Commandments were to be followed faithfully. They were common sense to me. Adults were respected. What were never talked about were the concepts of heaven or hell. While there were Bible stories about how people brought destruction upon themselves for making poor choices, they were like fairy tales to me. I was never scared into behaving by my parents. It was assumed that I would understand the results of consequences of my actions. The emphasis in Judaism then and now is about how we live our lives in the present, how we make this existence the best possible for all. I am very thankful for how I was raised, as I have carried those basic tenets in my soul throughout my life. They have everything to do with my decisions governing my life and how I treat others. I did attend Hebrew school for 1 year. It occurred in the afternoon after my regular public school day, and I resented not being able to go straight home. Boys were required to attend Hebrew school, girls were not, so that 1 year was enough for me. I did not go back. In my mind, boys seemed to be treated as more important than girls. Women had the usual societal expectations and duties as far as home, food, and children, and charitable work was concerned. But they didn't seem to oversee crucial general problems or how the synagogue itself was run. This, I am relieved to say, changed later on after I no longer went to this synagogue. The synagogue actually had for several decades a husband and wife team of rabbis that led everything. Until I was 8 or 9, there were several Jewish families in my neighborhood. Then my uncle's family moved further north in Indianapolis, along with most of those neighbors. By the time I was in 3rd grade, there were only 8 Jewish children at my public school. My neighborhood playmates were Catholic and Protestant. I remember my mother telling me that everyone hates Jews. She gave me the Diary of Anne Frank to read and other novels about the Holocaust. My 4 grandparents left Russia and Lithuania in the late 1890s because their villages were destroyed. My grandparents in Indianapolis were threatened by the Ku Klux Klan. Jews were not allowed in many Indianapolis organizations. My boyfriend's mother had a tattoo on her arm from having been in a concentration camp. I was chased down my block by a neighborhood Catholic girl, carried a rake with a worm on it, yelling, "You killed Jesus!" And me yelling back, "I did not." My middle sister was deliberately run over by a Catholic boy on a bicycle who accused her of the same crime. Yet, one of my best friends and next door neighbor was Catholic, and I was in and out of that household constantly. I came home from dinner there one night telling my mom that she had to start making this dish called tuna noodle casserole. As an adult, one has a good fortune to take the chaos of childhood and give it a sane perspective. Looking back on that time, I realized there were more people who felt the way of those 2 children, but I was so protected by the adults in my family that I didn't recognize it for what it was. Still, I had Gentile playmates who never made me feel I was different. And Gentile families on my block whose houses I was constantly in and out of. My mother and her friends kept to their tight community. Their parents and they had had frightening experiences and rejection. I had been exposed to people who proved that not all of their fears and rules were accurate. You cannot say all people are like this or that. You cannot lump people into groups. At some point, a schism developed in my outlook. In high school, I was supposed to eat lunch with Jewish children only, or Jewish teenagers only, which I did. But I started visiting other girls at lunch who weren't Jewish. For me, they were funny and refreshing. Resentment began to brew. Some inner part of me was rebelling. I sometimes felt like I couldn't breathe. The Jewish community was very closely tight-knit, and I understand that this was a form of protection driven by horrible persecutions and restrictions from the outside. So to do this was the way for the community to survive. I only dated boys who were Jewish. My friends have heard me tell the story about the fact that Dave Letterman attended my high school, and one of his best friends asked me out on a date. And without thinking about it, I just said to him, I can't. You're not Jewish. There are Jews and there are Gentiles, a clear dictate of a separation and the forbidden. I graduated high school. I went to Indiana University in Bloomington. The first week I was there, I agreed to go out on a blind date with a young man whose religion I didn't even ask about. A new book of my life opened and began. My sophomore year at IU, I met a senior young woman whom I truly admired. She was calm and intelligent, and I wished I was as beautiful. We were dating guys who were roommates. She was a Unitarian, and she spent one afternoon discussing her beliefs with me as a Unitarian. I can still see Marty and myself sitting in her room that afternoon. I'm sure she didn't know the influence she would have on me. One of my mother's best friends refused to attend my wedding because my husband-to-be was not Jewish. Years later, the woman apologized to my mother. My sisters both married men who were not Jewish. My mother, a woman so proud of her heritage, always said she couldn't have had finer sons-in-law. I will tell you, though, that when my second husband, Tom, was also not Jewish, she did get a wistful tone, and she said, I thought maybe this time? When my first husband and I moved to Columbus in 1972, we had a 2-year-old daughter, Marla. In a couple of years, Matthew was born. And when they were in elementary school, we felt that we needed to offer them spiritual guidance. We did not want to raise them as Christian or Jewish. A Unitarian Universalist fellowship existed in town, and I remembered my conversation with Marty at IU. We went to a summertime pitch-in that turned out to be not only a picnic, but a lobster fest. The people were welcoming, warm, and helpful, very interesting, and we felt an immediate bond, and we signed the membership book not long after. Until our children went to college and chose their own paths, the family celebrated Christmas and Hanukkah, Easter and Passover every year. My son continues to celebrate Hanukkah and Christmas with his son every year. And when my husband Tom was alive, he joined in on both celebrations. Whoever is available, the tradition continues. Judaism gave me the basic ethical laws of behavior by which I formed my life. I no longer believe in a powerful God, patriarchal, who closely observes me from the outside. God is within me and holds no human form whatsoever. God is my innermost self, my soul, giving me perspective, offering me ways to think and conduct myself. The universe is vast and it's so intricate in its design. I admire that design as a form of worship. I have a small place in it, and that gives me peace. Unitarian Universalism has provided a larger base by which I can do this in the world. Once my mother died, my family stopped doing a Passover Seder, an important Jewish holiday and service conducted through a meal. However, at the Unitarian Universalist congregation, we have celebrated a women's Seder several years off and on. This last Memorial Day, I did something a little different. I have a Jewish light for mourning the dead. It has the Star of David on it. It's called a yahrzeit candle. And on the date of the person's death, in which, if it's a Jewish person, you're using a lunar calendar, on that day only, for 24 hours, you turn on the candle, the light. Although no one in my family had died on Memorial Day, I turned it on for all the people I have loved, for those who have loved me, and for all those who died in the wars. I had not done this before. And I turned it on and kept it on again once the protests began for all those people who have died because of racial bias. I will not turn it off until I see real changes applied to counter the insidious poison of racism. This is how both religions have formed me, support me, and continue to help me make the choices in this vast universe. And I'm thankful for them both.